Hello everyone, welcome to Love Wave's story. I never believed in signs or fate, but the day I met her felt wrong in a way I still can't fully explain. It was a random Tuesday and I was standing in line at a small coffee shop near my office, half awake and scrolling through emails, when the woman behind me tapped my shoulder and smiled like we already knew each other. She said, very casually, "Hey, you're married to Daniel too, right?" And I laughed because it sounded ridiculous, like a bad joke that didn't land, so I turned around and said sorry, expecting her to correct herself, but she didn't laugh back. Instead, her face shifted from confusion to embarrassment and then to something serious, and she said his full name, Daniel Harris, tall, dark hair, works in logistics, and my stomach dropped because that was my husband. I told her slowly that Daniel was my husband, watching her reaction, and she froze for a second before pulling out her phone and saying that's my husband, showing me a photo, and there was no doubt because it was him, the same crooked smile, the same small scar near his eyebrow. I felt this cold pressure in my chest and said we had been married for 3 years, trying to sound calm, and she swallowed before replying 5 years. The barista called my name but I didn't move, the noise of the cafe faded, and I kept saying there had to be a mistake even though my hands were shaking, while she nodded quickly and said that's what she thought too, until she checked the dates, and then she showed me screenshots of messages, trips, and photos of him wearing a wedding ring I had never seen before, not mine, a different one, and when she said he proposed to her in 2018, my ears started ringing because that was the exact same year he proposed to me. I stared at her phone longer than I should have, my brain trying to find something fake, something off, but the timestamps lined up too perfectly, the locations made sense, and the way he smiled in her photos was the same private smile I thought was only mine. I asked her where they lived, already afraid of the answer, and she said Seattle, which made my heart jump because Daniel traveled there constantly for work projects that I never questioned. I told her we lived in Chicago, and instead of arguing, she just nodded slowly like that confirmed something she had been scared to admit for a long time. We sat down at a small table without even ordering coffee, two strangers suddenly connected by the same man, and she told me her name was Rachel. She said Daniel was gone a lot but always checked in, always called her his wife, always talked about their future house, their future kids, and I felt sick because he said the same things to me, sometimes using the exact same phrases. I told her about our wedding, a small ceremony, close friends, how he cried during his vows, and she went pale because she said they had a ceremony too, not legal, not official, but intimate and emotional, with rings and promises and photos to prove it. That's when it hit me, he didn't marry either of us by accident, he built 2 lives on purpose, carefully, patiently, and somehow never slipped. I asked her if she ever suspected anything, and she laughed bitterly and said she once found an email receipt for flowers sent to another woman, and when she confronted him, he told her it was for his sister. My sister hates flowers, I said quietly, and Rachel looked at me like she finally understood the scale of what we were dealing with. Neither of us cried yet, which scared me more than if we had, because it felt like the calm before something ugly broke open. We decided not to call him right away, not because we were calm, but because we were terrified of what he might say if he had time to prepare a lie, so instead we started comparing timelines, dates, trips, holidays, birthdays, all of it, sliding our phones back and forth across the table like evidence in a trial. That's when the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time he told me he was traveling for work, he was with her, and every time he told her he was on a long project in Chicago, he was with me. He never missed an anniversary, never missed a birthday, he just celebrated them twice, on different days, with different excuses. Rachel showed me messages where he called her his only real home, and my hands started shaking because I had the same message on my phone, word for word, sent months apart. I asked her if he ever talked about kids, and she hesitated before saying yes, that they were trying, that he even went with her to a fertility consultation last year. And I felt my stomach twist because he told me he wasn't ready, that kids scared him, that maybe someday. That was the first time I stood up, pacing the cafe like I couldn't sit inside my own skin anymore, realizing this wasn't just cheating, this was a double life built with precision. I asked her the question I was most afraid of, whether she thought he loved either of us, and she looked down at her hands before saying she didn't think love was the right word, control was, and that scared me more than anything else. We finally agreed on one thing: we needed to see him together, in person, without warning, because whatever he was hiding, we were done being polite about it. We planned it faster than I expected, like our shock had flipped into survival mode, and Rachel suggested we confront him at the one place neither of us belonged, his parents' house. She said he was supposed to be there that weekend for his father's birthday, and my heart dropped because he told me the exact same thing, except he said he was going alone to keep things simple. The idea of standing side by side in front of his family made my stomach churn, but I agreed because I was done meeting him on his terms. We drove separately but arrived within minutes of each other, and I still remember the look on his mother's face when two women stepped onto the porch at the same time, both wearing wedding rings with his last name. When Daniel opened the door, his face drained of color so fast I almost didn't recognize him. His mouth opened but no sound came out, like his brain had completely stalled. Rachel spoke first, calm and steady, asking him which wife he wanted to introduce to his parents, and the silence that followed felt endless. His father stood behind him, confused, his mother's eyes darted between us, and that's when Daniel finally said my name, then hers, like saying them out loud might somehow fix it. I expected yelling or denial, but instead he started crying, real tears, apologizing over and over, saying he never meant for this to happen, that he loved us both in different ways. That was the moment something inside me snapped, because love doesn't require lies this deep, this organized, this cruel. His mother asked one simple question, how long, and when Rachel said 5 years and I said 3, the room went completely still, and I realized this wasn't just our betrayal anymore, it was about to destroy his entire family too. His parents asked us to sit down, but I couldn't, my legs felt like they didn't belong to me anymore, and Daniel kept talking, apologizing, explaining, saying he panicked, saying it started small, saying he never planned for it to go this far, and every word made me angrier because nothing about this was small. Rachel asked him the question I didn't even know how to form yet, which marriage was real, the legal one or the one built on promises and rituals, and he froze again, looking at the floor like a child caught stealing. That's when his mother asked for proof, documents, dates, anything, and I pulled out our marriage certificate with shaking hands, while Rachel opened a folder on her phone filled with photos, trips, emails, even a drafted prenup he had sent her and never signed. Watching his parents absorb that was unbearable. His father kept rubbing his face in silence, and his mother whispered his name like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. Daniel finally admitted that he legally married me because of timing and pressure, but that didn't make me feel chosen, it made me feel like paperwork. And Rachel didn't look relieved either because he immediately added that what he had with her was deeper and emotional. That was the moment Rachel laughed, a sharp, broken sound, and said he had a talent for splitting himself into exactly what people needed, and I realized we weren't rivals, we were proof. His mother asked us what we wanted to do next, and the truth was neither of us knew yet, because walking away felt too easy for something this calculated, and staying felt impossible, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't leaving without answers, not anymore. We asked him to leave the room so we could talk alone, and for the first time he didn't argue, he just nodded and walked out like a man already shrinking, and the door closing behind him felt louder than any scream. Rachel and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table, two women who should have never met, yet somehow knew more about each other than most friends ever would, and she asked me something that caught me off guard, whether I planned to divorce him immediately. I told her I didn't know, not because I wanted him, but because I wanted the truth first, the full version, not the edited one he served depending on who he was talking to. She admitted she felt the same, that walking away without understanding how someone could live like this felt like letting him keep control of the story. We compared more details, bank accounts, credit cards, addresses, and that's when another layer appeared. He had money set aside neither of us knew about, a separate account used only for gifts, trips, and emergencies, like he had budgeted for deception. When Daniel came back into the room, Rachel asked him calmly how many other lives he had, and his silence answered before his words did, because after a long pause he admitted there was another woman years ago, not a wife, not serious, just overlap. And that word made my skin crawl. I realized then this wasn't about love or fear or confusion, it was about addiction, the rush of being needed, admired, central to someone's world, multiplied. Rachel looked at me and said quietly that whatever we chose next, we had to choose it together, not because we owed each other loyalty, but because dividing us was the only power he ever really had. That night we stayed, not because we wanted to, but because leaving felt like letting him escape the weight of what he'd done, and Daniel slept on the couch while Rachel and I shared the guest room, lying awake in the dark like survivors of the same accident. We talked in low voices, about the versions of him we fell in love with, the jokes he reused, the habits we thought were unique, and with every overlap something inside me hardened. She told me he used to say he loved how independent she was, how she didn't need much, and I laughed bitterly because he said the same thing to me when I asked for more time together. It wasn't a compliment, it was a strategy. Sometime around 3 a.m., Rachel said something that changed everything. She said she had once tried to leave him years ago, and a week later he showed up crying, saying he'd been depressed, saying he didn't know who he was without her, and promising therapy. I felt sick because he told me that exact story last year, same phrasing, same tears, same timeline, except in my version she was a crazy ex who hurt him deeply. That was the moment I understood how carefully he rewrote reality depending on the audience, and how close we both had come to disappearing inside his story. By morning, we weren't angry anymore, we were focused, and when Daniel walked into the kitchen acting fragile and apologetic, I realized something frightening. I wasn't scared of losing him. I was scared of what he would do to the next woman if we let him walk away untouched. We decided we needed proof, not just words, so we spent the morning documenting everything, screenshots, receipts, emails, trips, photos, even the little details he bragged about to both of us that proved he was living a double life intentionally. And it felt like gathering evidence for a crime we weren't sure the police could prosecute. Rachel suggested we create a timeline side by side, every trip, every lie, every romantic gesture, and as we did it, the pattern was so precise it made my stomach churn, like he had designed this life like a spreadsheet, dates, hours, conversations, nothing accidental. We realized he had the same conversations with both of us, same phrases, same confessions, and even some gifts overlapped but with different explanations. By lunch, we had a binder full of undeniable proof, and that's when Daniel started texting both of us at the same time, panicked, asking to meet, begging for forgiveness, claiming he couldn't live without either of us, and that's when Rachel and I exchanged a look, something unspoken, a mix of disgust and clarity, and decided to respond together. We invited him to the same coffee shop where we first met, telling him we needed him to explain himself one last time, in front of both of us, with everything laid bare, and when he arrived, seeing the binder on the table, his face turned pale, his hands trembled slightly, and I realized we had finally shifted the balance of power, and he knew it. When Daniel sat down across from us, he tried to speak, but we didn't let him start. We opened the binder and laid it flat, every photo, every message, every lie in chronological order, and the look on his face was priceless, a mix of panic, guilt, and disbelief that we had finally caught him in full. I started reading aloud, dates, places, promises, gifts, everything repeated with a precision that made my blood boil, and Rachel added her own observations, the things I hadn't noticed, the little manipulations, the way he made each of us feel uniquely special while doing the exact same things. He tried to interrupt, said it wasn't what it looked like, that he was under stress, that he made mistakes, but we stopped him every time, calm but relentless, and I felt a strange thrill because for the first time he couldn't charm, couldn't redirect, couldn't lie fast enough to cover the evidence. His hands shook, he whispered our names, begged, apologized, promised therapy, change, a future, but we both knew it was empty words, rehearsed lines he used to keep us hooked, to control the narrative. I realized then that Rachel and I were no longer victims, we were witnesses, and for the first time I understood the power of standing together. Two women who should have hated each other but instead became the only people capable of seeing him for what he really was. By the time we left the coffee shop, Daniel was silent, unable to manipulate, and Rachel and I walked out side by side, hearts racing, knowing the story wasn't over but that we had reclaimed the first chapter of our lives from him. After that day, Rachel and I started communicating constantly, texting, calling, comparing everything he said and did, and it felt like building a secret alliance against someone we both loved and hated at the same time. We found more inconsistencies, small lies that didn't matter to him but mattered to us, things about trips, bills, even conversations with friends, and the more we uncovered, the clearer it became that his life was a web he thought he could control, and we were two flies caught in it until now. One evening, we met at a park, sitting on opposite ends of a bench, talking about what we wanted next, not him, not the marriage, but us, and Rachel said something I will never forget: he made us fight each other, but we're the only ones who can stop him. I nodded, realizing she was right, that if we handled this together, we could protect ourselves and anyone else he might try to deceive in the future. We began documenting everything officially, consulting lawyers separately, preparing ourselves for whatever confrontation would come next, and through it all, there was this strange feeling of empowerment growing inside me, like I had been asleep in my own life and someone had finally pulled the blinds open. I realized for the first time that this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about reclaiming control, and even though fear still lurked in the back of my mind, the anger and clarity made me feel alive in a way I hadn't for years. That night, we made a pact, silent but firm, that no matter what he said, no matter how he tried to twist reality, we would not let him divide us, and that promise felt heavier and stronger than any wedding ring I ever wore. Over the next few weeks, we started testing him, small things at first, subtle questions, hints dropped in casual conversation, and every time he slipped, every tiny contradiction, our confidence grew. He tried to charm us back, sending flowers, gifts, apologies written on napkins, voicemails begging for forgiveness, and at first I almost felt guilty, almost believed some of it, but then Rachel would point out the pattern, the recycled lines, the identical phrases he used with both of us, and the guilt dissolved into clarity. One night, he called both of us at the same time, leaving two different voicemails, both pleading, both emotional, both claiming he wanted to fix his mistakes, and I played them back side by side, word for word, tone for tone, and I laughed, bitter and loud, because the scale of his manipulation was staggering. Rachel and I realized that confronting him together wasn't enough. We needed to make sure this behavior could never continue, that he couldn't lie to women like this ever again, and that thought scared me more than anything, because it meant planning moves he would never see coming, moves that might destroy him completely. By then, our lives had merged in ways I never expected, our friendship built on shared betrayal, shared anger, and shared determination, and I started feeling a strange pride in the fact that we were no longer isolated victims but a force he could not control, no matter how charming, how persuasive, how practiced he was. The day finally came when we decided to confront him legally, meeting with our separate lawyers but sharing information, emails, photos, and everything we had documented, and it felt surreal sitting in the office, two women who should have been enemies, plotting together to expose someone we once loved. Daniel called repeatedly, panicked, begging for meetings, trying to charm us over the phone, but Rachel and I ignored every call, knowing he was out of options, and it gave me a strange sense of calm, like finally breathing after holding my breath for years. Our lawyers started talking about separation agreements, property, finances, custody if any children were involved in the future, and I realized that what we were building was more than revenge, it was protection, it was setting boundaries. It was reclaiming control over a life that had been stolen by lies. Rachel and I would glance at each other during the discussions, small nods, shared looks that said, "We've got this, we see him now," and I felt an overwhelming mixture of relief and sorrow, because while I was glad we were taking action, part of me mourned the man I thought I knew, the man I once trusted completely. Later that evening, we sat in her apartment, exhausted, and she said quietly that the strangest thing about all this was realizing how strong we were when we stopped seeing each other as competitors and started seeing each other as allies, and I knew in that moment that whatever happened next, nothing could ever make me doubt my own strength again. Weeks passed, and Daniel tried everything, emails, texts, even showing up at my apartment, desperate to explain, to charm, to convince us he could be trusted, but Rachel and I remained united, our friendship now stronger than anything he could manipulate. We started noticing patterns in his behavior we hadn't seen before, small lies about work, trips, friends, and it was like watching a spider caught in its own web, frantic and panicked, unable to hide or spin a new story fast enough. One night, Rachel called me crying, saying she had finally blocked him on every platform because she couldn't handle another plea for forgiveness, and I felt the same overwhelming mix of relief and heartbreak, knowing this chapter was ending, yet the scars of his deception would remain. We began talking about our own lives, rediscovering what we wanted, laughing about things he never noticed, sharing secrets we'd never told anyone, and in those conversations, I realized that without him, we had space to breathe, to heal, to reclaim ourselves. The anger was still there, simmering, but it had transformed into clarity and strength, and I started feeling something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of freedom. By the time I went to bed that night, I understood that he had tried to control 2 lives, but in reality, he had given us something he could never take away, each other. By now, Rachel and I had formed a routine, checking in daily, sharing updates, laughing about the ridiculousness of the lies he tried to spin, and slowly, life outside of his manipulation started to feel possible. We started noticing things we'd ignored before, like how much energy we wasted pretending everything was normal, how many sacrifices we made to maintain his perfect image, and for the first time, we let ourselves imagine a life without him dictating our reality. One evening, over coffee, Rachel said something that hit me hard. He wanted us divided, scared, alone, but instead he's the one who lost everything while we're the ones standing. I nodded, realizing she was right, that every lie, every manipulation, every double life had been built to control us, but in trying to control us, he had built a cage he couldn't escape from himself. We started thinking about closure, not revenge, not anger, but real closure, what we needed to feel safe, to protect our futures, to make sure no one else ever became part of his twisted game. And in that moment, I felt a strange peace, because while the betrayal would never fully disappear, the power he had over me, over us, was gone, and that knowledge felt heavier, stronger, and more liberating than any love I had once felt for him. I realized we had reclaimed our lives, and nothing he could do would ever put us back in that position again. Daniel tried one last time to manipulate, to charm, to divide us, but Rachel and I didn't even flinch. We didn't answer his calls, we didn't read his messages, we just continued building our lives apart from him, stronger and more aware than ever. We realized the real betrayal wasn't just his lies, it was the time we lost trusting him, the energy we wasted loving someone who never existed fully for either of us, and accepting that was both painful and liberating. We both moved forward in our own ways, Rachel focusing on her career, me on mine, but we stayed in contact, sometimes laughing at memories, sometimes sharing advice about people who act like him, and I realized that this bond, this alliance born from betrayal, was more powerful than anything he could have given us. Life feels different now, sharper, clearer, and I don't spend time worrying about his intentions anymore, because the story isn't about him, it's about us, our choices, our strength, our survival. Thank you for listening to this story. If you found it shocking, emotional, or empowering, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, turn on the notification bell, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know what you would do if you were in our shoes.